since I can't see. Live. Okay, thank you. All right, well, welcome everybody to the December meeting of the Asheville Urban Forestry Commission. My name is Amy Smith, I'm the chair. We're gonna just start off with introductions and go from there. So again, Amy Smith. The vice chair, Dawn Chavez, is not here currently. We're hoping she'll pop in late. But moving around the room as I see you all on my screen, Cecil.
Cecil Bothwell, Urban Forestry Commission.
And Patrick.
Patrick Gilbert, Urban Forestry Commission.
Zoe.
Zoe Hoyle, Urban Forestry Commission.
Karen.
Karen McNeil, Urban Forestry Commission.
And Ed.
Ed Macy, Urban Forestry Commission.
Thank you. Patrick, go ahead.
Yes, Madam Chair, before we get into the agenda, I see that we have public comment and then followed by the presentation on the municipal golf course. And we know by previous emails, the public comment is about the municipal golf course and the tree removal there. So I would like to propose that we amend the agenda and move item 5, old business, up to above item 4, staff reports and updates, and move item D of old business up to make that item A under old business. So we have that flow of comment, presentation, and then discussion on the municipal golf course tree removal.
All right, is that a motion?
I will make that motion.
All right, do we have a second? Anyone second it so we can vote? Thank you. So roll call vote to amend the agenda to move old business to after the presentation, including discussion of the golf course immediately following the presentation. So starting with Ed.
Aye.
Zoe.
Aye.
Cecil.
Aye.
Patrick.
Aye.
Karen.
Aye.
And I vote aye. So we'll amend the agenda. Karen.
I would also like to add new business to the agenda. If possible, I would like to make a motion to add the recommendation and resolution on the preservation of heritage trees to the agenda.
Okay, so a motion to add heritage trees to new business. Making a note here. A second?
Aye.
Cecil, thank you. We'll vote to amend the agenda to add one item of new business for heritage trees. Patrick, real quick before we vote.
Yes, I don't have any opposition to this, but I did want to ask staff if we can add new items to the agenda once it's been published. I just want to make sure we don't.
Yeah, we're following the process. It has to be before we get to the agenda, then we can add. So
okay, fine.
That is correct. So thank you. We will vote. Ed.
Aye.
Zoe.
Aye.
Cecil.
Aye.
Patrick.
Aye.
Karen.
Aye.
And I vote aye. So we have added one new business item. Cecil, go ahead.
I just wanted to say welcome to Mark, the new interim boss. Thank you for joining us at the meeting.
Yeah, well, we didn't get that far. So now that we have all the agenda straightened out, we need to finish introductions. So I appreciate that. We'll go ahead and kick it off with Mark. We do have some city staff here. So Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate that, Cecil, the introduction. So I'm Mark Matheny. I'm currently the interim director for development services. For the period of time replacing Ben Woody, who's moved up to our assistant city manager. We did an interim process. That'll be another couple of months. We'll do another full round of interviews for the permanent position, which I'll be a part of that process as well, and hopefully just be able to take the interim out of my title. So thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And while we're on Mark's, Mark Foster. You're on mute, Mark Foster. Yeah.
No, just kidding. Mark Foster, City Arborist, Public Works Department.
Thank you. All right. City staff, Nancy.
Nancy Watford, Stormwater Supervisor and Staff Liaison to Urban Forestry Commission.
Thank you. Haley.
Haley Mahoney, Development Review Specialist and Staff Assistant to the Urban Forestry Commission.
Thank you. And Chris Collins, are you with us?
I am here. Yeah. Good afternoon. Chris Collins with Development Services.
Thank you. All right. Well, I think that's everybody. We unfortunately do not have our presenter yet. That's okay. So we're calling the meeting to order, and next step is to approve the minutes from the November meeting. And I believe everyone here was present at that meeting. So I just need a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Or do I just vote on it? Okay, well, we'll motion. Thank you.
So move.
Thank you. A second.
Second.
There we go. I think Cecil got it in
I
there.
was muted.
That's okay. All right. So Ed,
Aye.
Zoe,
Aye.
Cecil,
Aye.
Patrick,
Aye.
Karen,
Aye.
and I vote aye. So the minutes are approved. So we'll go ahead and do public comment. Are there any callers before we go to the written?
Let me check.
For the written.
Let's see here. We do have some callers on the line. Let's see if they would like to provide comment. Callers on the line, if you'd like to provide public comment, please press *3 now. Okay, we have a couple people entering the queue. Callers, you'll have 3 minutes to provide your public comment. I will let the first person in here in just a second. It is loading. Okay, I'm gonna let the first person in now. Caller ending in 0343, please go ahead and speak. Caller ending in 0343.
And having reviewed the,
I'm sorry. Can you start over? You were muted there for a second.
Yes, I'm Queen Lady Passion. Very involved in the tree protection task force and tree saving and preservation of heritage trees as well, such as the magnolias. So I'm glad to hear that that's been added, hopefully, to the agenda. That needs to move forward. But my concern is that having reviewed the plans and having considered the city arborist's belief that, designation that about 157, 153, it varies, trees on the municipal golf course are dead or have oak wither or similar such things, as well as pines, according to people that frequent the golf course, should be felled after having the grass having been mismanaged by a previous company, and the new company having very, very, to me, upon review, sketchy and suspect and doubtful plans for restoration. And I believe it to be violation of the new city tree protection zero net loss ordinance. My concern is that I don't see any eco plan that is tangible for bringing back the grass and trying to restore the health of the trees instead of typical chemical treatment of grass that will pose city liability peril because many people frequent them for long hours, these courses, and if they're in a chemical stew, seedlings won't thrive if the mature trees aren't thriving. And I think it opens up the city to liability, not just from leaning trees that are trying to get sunlight, which is natural, but from lack of trying to abide by the ordinance and trying to go more eco-friendly and avoid, liability lawsuits from Roundup and all kinds of the chemicals that they use. So I would like to I'd be really interested to see concrete plans by this new company and an acknowledgement of its responsibility to go eco, to prevent city liability, et cetera, and save these trees.
Thank you, caller. That was 3 minutes. Thank you. All right, our next caller ending in 5859. Please go ahead.
Hi. Hi, this is Steve Rasmussen. I've also read the presentation and inventory documents for the Muni Golf Course tree removal request that you're about to see. And I too have some questions and concerns that I hope will be addressed. Pretty similar ones. I think the golf course is a valuable institution in the Asheville community, but not just for golfers. It's also a large, mature green space that plays an important role in helping protect our urban ecosystem from the effects of climate change. So I am wondering, first of all, why I don't see anything in the presentation about sustainable landscaping practices, because golf courses typically are notorious sources of aquifer pollution, both above ground and below ground, thanks to their intensive use of toxic chemical pesticides and fertilizers. But there is a movement nationally to change that and substitute organic fertilizers and best pest management practices, even if it means a slightly less perfect lawn. So why isn't the municipal golf course of our famously eco-conscious city taking this opportunity to switch over to sustainable management practices? And I'm wondering if some of the oak trees, for example, that are slated for removal because they're dying from oak wilt, as Lady Passion mentioned, would in fact recover if the golf course made this switch, because I've heard from local experts that chemical fertilizers could be a cause of this. Has any soil testing been done? I'm also wondering why some 30 or so trees on holes 3 and 5 only are sentenced to removal en masse because of end of life. What does that generic phrase mean other than that you're ending their life by cutting them down? That's a question I'd like to have answered. Finally, I'm wondering how many of the trees being removed because they're leaning actually do pose a hazard of falling, and how many are leaning simply because they're seeking the light and have compensated against gravity, as trees often do, by strengthening their wood. And that's something I'd like to hear addressed by you all tree experts sitting on the commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. Our next caller, his number is ending in 5420. I'm going to unmute you now. Please speak when you're ready. Caller ending in 5420.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Casey. I've lived in Asheville for 15 years. Thank you, commissioners, council member Roney, and for everybody's service to the city of Asheville. I'm absolutely in favor of improving and restoring our beloved Muni Golf Course, and everyone I've talked to is also. At the same time, I'm hopeful that the city can come up with a revised tree plan that emphasizes tree trimming over tree cutting and better reflects our community values on saving mature trees. This is a chance for the city to live up to its own ideals by working with arborists that are committed to caring for tree health rather than tree destruction. We entrusted the previous operator, Pope Golf, to care for the course. They were negligent, did nothing to nurture the grass, which was in good condition under these same large, mature shade trees just a few years ago. Given that, I would argue that Commonwealth Golf Partners, a company unknown to us thus far, like Pope was, needs to earn our trust, and together with the city, come up with ways to grow grass while saving these majestic trees. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, caller. All right, that was all the callers we have in the speaker queue.
Okay, thank you. We also received many written comments. The last tally was around 80. Much of the public comment received, obviously I'm not able to read all of them in the time allotted here. Many were the same comments that we just heard about the golf course and saving the trees, questions about the arborist reporting that we have here, wanting to see a different type of reporting that might have more detail. So that's just to sum up, but the callers pretty much went through all of the same issues as the written comments. So thank you everyone for your written comment and for calling in. So that brings us to our presentation. Obviously, we're going to wait and hear from Chris Coral, and then we can ask questions and address the issues that have been raised. I think Chris will be able to, he heard everything we just heard, and he'll be able to answer a lot of those questions better than I can. So Chris, I guess we're ready for your presentation if you want to introduce yourself and take it from here.
Okay. Haley, are you driving this?
I believe Nancy is.
Oh, Nancy is? Okay. Well, all right then. Disregard where my face is pointing because my computer and my camera are in different ways. So I'm looking at you, but not at the camera all the time. So apologies for that. So first, I just wanted to introduce myself and our department because our department is relatively new. We were formed in January of 2022. So I'm Chris Coral. I'm the director of the Community and Regional Entertainment Facilities Department. And next slide, please. We are covering, I guess you have to click twice. I don't know. But so we cover a lot of different facilities here. We cover the Harris Cherokee Center, the Thomas Wolfe Auditorium, Aston Park Tennis Complex, John B. Lewis Soccer Complex, the WNC Nature Center, Asheville Municipal Golf Course, and the city's Office of Outdoor Special Events. So essentially there was like a reorganization that brought all of the regional entertainment style facilities that the community has access to under one umbrella so that we can all work together on joint applications to regional style grants and really just some efficiencies in how our statistics work and how we treat events and sports tournaments across all the city facilities. So if we could go to the next slide. The Muni Golf Course, just so everybody knows, it's a golf course that's on the National Registrar of Historic Places. It was designed by Donald Ross, who's one of the founding members of the Golf Hall of Fame. It was the first public course in North and South Carolina and the first course in the Southeast region to be integrated. And at that same time, the Skyview Golf Association was formed back in 1959 by a group of local Black golfers and community leaders. And they have held the Skyview Open, which is an annual tournament in July, every year since. I think they're on their 63rd year this coming. And it's the only surviving Black-owned and operated three-day professional golf tournament in the country. So there's a lot of really great history at that course, and I could go on, but that's not what we're worried about today. So if we could keep going. It was opened in 1927. It's a par 72. We do about 41,000 rounds a year on average. That was a pre-COVID average. There's been a pretty good bump since then. I'm waiting for it to re-plateau before we start quoting numbers that are probably higher than they should be, because in 2021, for example, we did about 46,000 rounds. It's a recognized top 10 Carolinas youth-owned course location for 10 consecutive years. A lot of the golfers there treat it as their community center. And if you stop by any day of the week, you'll really understand that. Even if you're a stranger, they're going to come up and say, hey, and see how you're doing and just kind of chat you up. And it's the home golf course for 3 middle school and 3 high school golf programs, and for practice and play. And all the local high school teams, except for one, play all of their matches there. Next slide, please. It's really an ideal course for growing the game, youth play, smaller tournaments, and we're opening up with our new agreement targets to go after junior tournaments, NCAA mid-major tournaments, PGA league and section events to really try to boost some of the tournament business there to coincide with our hotel tax grant that we received. Next slide, please. So the course, for anybody that's been out there, is in pretty rough shape right now. And this is a picture here of the 16th fairway, which is one of the worst fairways. They're not all like this. And I guess I would mention, just because I heard one of the callers bring this up, the grass was better, yes, 4 or 5 years ago, but not throughout the course. There were certain areas that have really declined heavily since Pope stopped taking care of the course, but most of the areas that we're concentrating on are areas that have been bad for decades. If you talk to some of the golfers that have been there a long, long time, some of the neighborhood residents, there's certain areas of the course that were terrible even when the city and the county ran it. And Pope really focused on trying to get back certain areas and never really had success in some spots. And then when we started having stormwater issues, really just kind of threw in the towel in the course, which was mostly then affected in holes 10, 11, and the areas around the course, like between the golf course and the roadways and like the non-golf areas, if you will. They basically stopped maintaining anything that didn't have a direct effect on bottom line. If we could go to the next slide, please. So our main challenges with the course are stormwater, like I mentioned. All of the bunkers have terrible drainage. Even a small rainstorm, you'll see little lakes inside every bunker. Cart paths have a lot of damage and potholes throughout the entirety of the course. Trees, which we'll obviously get into. Greens, we've got a lot of drainage issues on greens, and additionally in some specific greens, some molding issues with the grass and real challenges growing it. 13, 14, and 16 are real big targets there. Tee boxes, similar. There's a lot of shading and rooting issues from trees that are causing challenges for keeping the tee boxes covered in grass and not dirt. There's truly just like hard mud compaction in a lot of them that's making it really challenging. And then fairways, like the picture you just saw, and some condensing of the fairways from original design where they are now not as wide as they used to be. If you could go to the next slide, please. So our funding status, we're working on a goal total project of about 3.5 million through various funds from different grants, city funding, and some future revenue that's going to be generated from the golf course. Next slide, please. So our total committed funding as of today is at about 2.8 million. So we're about 700,000 short of our goal. But some of the grants that we had been planning on applying for still have not opened for the application. And so that's part of the reason that we're not all the way up there yet, but hopefully those grants come through. Next slide, please. So our initial goal budget, which included, based on the $3.5 million project, some stormwater retention and stormwater repair and water retention design, the tree study that's already been spent, our stormwater assessment, which is money that was already spent. But so a significant portion of this project is really on stormwater remediation and irrigation water retention. So what that means is fixing all the bad pipes, but also trying to find a place on the golf course at the low-lying areas that we can create a pond or a small lake, if you will. Right now, the golf course pays every time that we run the sprinklers, it's city potable water. And that bill is significant, like in the $150,000 a year range. And if we have a way to catch all of that stormwater that currently is causing a challenge when we fix the pipe, and they're the low-lying areas where the irrigation taps into city water, and we can pump that into the irrigation system, we can reuse that water while watering the grass to have a better opportunity to give the grass all the water it needs, slow down the water before it hits the river, and lower our annual operating costs. So then other upgrades, greens and bunkers, fairway regrassing where possible, tree removal, thinning, and replacement, which we're going to talk about today, cart path repairs, historical marker signage and installation, and some basic work in the clubhouse. And when I say that, I mean truly basic, like new carpet, new paints, some fixtures, not like a renovation of the clubhouse. Next slide, please. So our target timeline was to start tree work in the winter of 22-23. Spring and summer, we'll get into cart paths, stormwater, bunkers, tees, greens, and skipping a lot of work in the summer because that's heavy play time and we don't want to drastically affect revenue coming in while we're trying to do this project. Falling into fall where we would start tree planting and grass planting. Next slide, please. So moving forward, future phases, we'd really like to do something with the clubhouse and bring it back to its historical significance. It used to be a really nice place before someone committed arson back in the 60s. We need some practice areas, and there's 2 on-course facilities, restroom spaces that are in pretty bad shape and really could use some renovation for the players. So next slide, please. So how we're going to get there, the new management structure is different than that of Pope Golf's, and I think it's important that everyone's clear on how that works. Pope Golf leased the course, so we were essentially the landlord, and they came in and they had full control of everything. And we see that that did not work out very well when something didn't go in their favor, and they decided to really stop assisting at the course. So the new management structure is a licensing agreement where we're essentially revenue share partners. So the city is now taking financial risk on the golf course. So it's important for us that we're running an operation that's lean and efficient. But we've also instituted a $1 facility management fee on all greens fees for non-annual pass holders. So that means if you don't have an annual pass and you show up and you buy a round of 18 holes and it used to cost $20, now it costs $21, and $1 goes directly into our capital improvement plan for next year. And we anticipate that that should bring in about $30,000 a year so that we could put that towards future capital improvements and work at the course. In a profitable situation, we're going to settle every quarter with Commonwealth. We'll split revenues 45% city, 55% Commonwealth after the first 5,000, which goes 100% to them. And if there's a loss, the city is going to cover 65% of that loss from $0. They also get some green fee commissions on new room nights, and they're managing the capital improvement project for us with a 4% management fee on all capital over $25,000. They're also required to do active tournament recruitment and expand the youth programs that exist at the course, because right now we basically do the bare minimum to keep that youth on course designation I mentioned earlier, which is the minimum that they were required of by Parks and Rec when Pope took over 10 years ago. And so we want to expand that and get some actual youth programming in there. Next slide, please. So I just mentioned most of these, so I'm going to kind of scoot by this quickly, but all of our money then gets reinvested is the long story short on that. So next slide. Preservation Society of Asheville-Buncombe County has stepped up to help as a nonprofit fiduciary because they feel that the course is very important as a historical marker in the city. So they are acting as a way that if people want to donate money to the project, they can, and they can donate it to the Preservation Society for tax deduction purposes, and it comes straight to the course. And they're actually covering any credit card fees and other expenses that come to that as their contribution to the project. Next slide, please. So already mentioned the 41,000 rounds. It's mostly local members. There's a lot of local tournaments, one professional tournament that has an impact of around $300,000 a year. And we get significant use by out-of-market guests. Next slide. Just to give you an idea of where everyone's coming from, there's a lot in the local region, but it truly has like at least East Coast impact, and you could argue national if you wanted to. All right, so next slide, and we'll get into the tree work specifically. So step one in this whole process, we brought in the United States Golf Association to do what they call a tree evaluation, which was completed in May of 2022. We got about 8 holes through with the agronomist, and he gave me a phrase around saying that we were going to need to remove well over 1,000 trees. And I said, hold on, let's only talk about greens and tees at this point, because we knew that there was no appetite for the city to try to cut down 1,000 trees in that course. It just was not realistic and not something we wanted to get into. So their evaluation then focused strictly on greens, tees, and the really worst areas of the fairways. And the outcome was a suggestion to remove well over 500 total trees on the property. Next slide, please. So after that evaluation, we had a golf architect come in, volunteer golf architect, not paid by the city, to come in and kind of review that USGA report, review the course, and give us some suggestions. And he helped us target about 225 trees that he felt like should be the trees that we should focus on removal at the course. We went through and we ended up tagging a little over 200, and then had track certified arborists come in and take a look. One of them was the city's arborist, and the other was a private arborist. And the results came to that list that you've seen posted on the website. In that process, some trees were added to the list that we did not have. Many trees were removed, and many trees were adjusted to a pruning plan. And 2 of them specifically we were asked to do some more testing and further review of the tree to see what the best results would be for it. Next slide, please. So of that list, there's a good bit of invasives. I think it's around 10 or 11. I'll have to get the list up on the screen here shortly to make sure I have the right numbers there. But we're targeting invasive trees, unhealthy hazard trees, and then trees that are directly competing with golf play. So anything that's got severe shading on either a tee box or a green, competing for heavy water access and then playability. So what that means is like the golfer's eye is the phrase that's used in golf. So if you're standing on the tee box ready to tee off, unless the hole is specifically designed that the green should be hidden, you should be able to see the pin on the green. And in a lot of cases, you can't due to the encroachment of the canopy. So we're trying to grow that golfer's eye out. And then also there's some situations where the fairways used to be, say, 150 feet wide, and now they're 100 feet wide, or similar situations throughout the course. They vary at every single hole. And that has some direct access or issues with shading. So when the sun goes up through the sky throughout the day, if the fairway is only getting an hour or two of sunlight, that doesn't allow opportunity for the grass to grow. And there's many, many places on the course that's a big challenge. And I know I've taken a lot of people on tours of the course and some members of this group, and you'll be out there at 1 PM and a green is fully shaded still and has not had sun yet for the day, which makes it really challenging to grow the grass. And so we're trying to, where possible, go with a prune first, remove if necessary policy. There's many trees that Mark, when he came through as our arborist, that we had marked as remove, that he encouraged us to prune first. And if it's still a very big challenge moving forward in a few years, then reevaluate for potential removal. And we're trying to take the animals into account. I got to say, we have done nothing to look at reviewing process for the squirrels, because there are a lot of squirrels, but we have looked into the birds specifically. And there's a already small wetland space that we'd like to expand that's between fairway 4 and 9. And we've targeted a few trees that we found that have a nest of some hawks in the neighborhood, that we're making sure, one, not to disturb those trees, but also trees in a 25-foot radius of that nest. So we're trying to steer clear of everything there. And so I was going to, Nancy, if you're running this, I was actually going to go through that spreadsheet too, if that's okay. Or would you guys rather do questions and then look at the spreadsheet? Amy, do you have a preference?
Walk us through briefly so that we all know where we're at here, and then we can go to questions.
Okay, thanks. All right, so this recap sheet's really just kind of what I wanted to touch base on first. And we did go through and we counted every single tree on the property. I'm sure we missed a couple, but this is a pretty good close number. That trees over 6 inches in diameter at breast height were at 2387. It's a 122 acre property, which comes out to an average of about 20 trees per acre. And we're looking to remove 10 invasive trees, 6 trees that are removal specifically for golf purposes. And when I say that, I do want to be clear. Both arborists told us that they did not have a good reason that they could see as a track arborist that tree had to be removed, that it was strictly us asking because it is for golf purposes. And then all the other trees on the property, working through with the arborists, there was a arborist style reason for each tree that it could be removed, and that we could justify as like a good reason that tree needed to be removed and replaced. And in a lot of those cases, it was heavy shading, leaning over the golf cart path, or in some cases the roadway around the golf course, or leaning over a green. A lot of competition of roots, and again, that shading of the fairway left to right. And so in speaking with Nancy, there wasn't a specific calculation formula for this type of project because there's no development with it. I know I spoke with some of you and you suggested going back and looking at those calculators to use that method. And after speaking with Nancy, I think it was easier to stick with this because there's not development that's coming after the trees are cut down. There's just tree removal and replacement here. So what we did was we valued the tree canopy with a large style tree at 1, medium at 0.75, and a small at 5, so that we could get to the same level of recalculation for planting in the future. And so if you could go down just a little bit, Nancy, we did a breakdown of every single different type of tree that was identified, the total number to be removed, what that is as a percentage of the total trees on property, and as a percentage of the total trees to be removed, and then valued that canopy to get to the 127.5 total canopy value. And let's see, wrong sheet here. And so then we have come up with a rough estimate on the different types of trees that we would replace, being large, medium, small, because we do want to make sure that there's different levels of canopy there. So it's where we are replacing it is like a true deciduous forest, right? Like there should be small trees and then medium size and big ones, and they should go up and down and travel around as far as the canopy height. And we've identified on property up to 165 different locations where trees can be planted back in the course. We do not want to try to plant every single tree back on the course, however, because we know trees and golf don't get along, right? So like trees and grass are like oil and water, and grass and golf are like peas and carrots. So one of those things doesn't really work well in certain situations. So trying to find that opportunity to move some of the trees off property was really key. So we created this ability for neighbors in East Asheville, not just in the neighborhood, but just in that general region of East Asheville, can sign up to have a tree purchased for them and delivered to their home. And if they need help with it, even help planting it on their property. And we have not advertised this yet. We literally just have it up on the website, and it was mentioned at a public meeting that we had in September. And so far we've had 10 different property owners sign up for 21 trees to be delivered. So we're trying to find that way to take those trees and get them off property onto someone's property nearby. And I'm really hoping that that can help grow our total canopy value replacement, and then not have to run into a tree conversation again in 20, 30 years as these trees grow up on property. And I do think that we'll have a really good response whenever we push this out and like truly advertise that program. And they're not sapling trees either, just to be clear. We're budgeting for 6 to 8 foot trees that are in a 10 to 15 gallon bucket. And they're native hardwoods and or native evergreens would be the trees that you could sign up for. And that'll be based on final availability with the nursery that we select. So the operator's currently talking to a couple different nurseries in the area to see who could handle that volume and the logistics around selling a tree to one place, but having to plant them in 30 or 40 different places. So yeah, that's the brief overview, and I'm happy to keep going, but I feel like it's probably a good time for questions.
All right, thanks. I'm going to jump in real quick, and Chris briefly mentioned that we did have a chance for some Urban Forestry Commission members to meet with Chris on site and run around and take a look at some of these trees, and that was myself and Karen and Zoe. And my impression from that meeting was quite positive. As Chris pointed out, and I just want to highlight, the golf organizations, if it were just, up to only golfing, somewhere not in Asheville, there would be well over 1,000 trees being removed, between 500 and 1,000. But I think Chris has done a really good job of setting the expectation that this is Asheville and we do have a priority on trees. And so this plan has been whittled down to what you see here. So just want to stress that. So that's just my take on where we're at. So I'll open it up for questions from commission members. Ed, go ahead.
I'm struggling a little bit with the risk assessments that were conducted on these trees. And just seeing what I've seen from the reports and from the spreadsheet, I'm not seeing typical risk assessment language used. The degree of risk that's associated with the trees, and any options for mitigating risk other than removal. You mentioned you had a track arborist. For those that don't know, track means tree risk assessment qualified. But use of the word hazard, for example, is not part of the risk assessment protocol anymore, yet it's still being used in this report. And I'm not seeing any of the typical risk assessment documentation that I would see with a risk report. So I'm kind of curious. I think that probably a lot of these trees that might have issues could probably have these issues mitigated. And then the likelihood of any of these trees failing, if they're in a wooded area, having any type of consequential impact, is not likely. So the trees wouldn't be a risk. So I'm suspect of the whole risk assessment part of this report. And I'm hoping maybe you have some more information that you could share with us, or you can elaborate on that. The other thing is that, I appreciate the conflict between trees and grass. I agree with you. It's like water and oil. I think, though, that with judicious pruning, you could probably open up a lot more view shed and a lot more sunlight without having to completely remove trees. So, I'm not being critical of what you're proposing, except that I think you maybe don't have all the information that you could have to make the decisions that you need to make.
Mm-hmm. So for the hazard trees, hazard's like a generic term that we've used for any of the danger trees. I'm not sure what the track word would be for that, but essentially I'd have to go and look at every single specific one, but I would say that the vast majority, if not all of the ones that are listed as hazard, directly have the ability to fall on golf cart path, on tee, or on green. So in area of play. There's not really, I don't think there's any trees that are inside a quote unquote wooded area that would fall and land also in wooded area, right? I mean, we're in a golf course, so most of the tree spacing is kind of thin. There's a few areas in the course that we do intend to leave as wooded areas and essentially only deal with a tree that falls down on its own. The left side of 16 for one, between 13 and 14. There's some spaces that the trees are truly not affecting golf in any way, and we don't want to mess with those trees, and we want to let them go and do their thing.
The tree risk assessment protocol looks at the likelihood of failure, striking a target, and whether or not the failures can be the likelihood of it can be mitigated. And then they attribute risk as being low, medium, high, severe, based on these likelihoods, following a matrix that was established by the tree care industry. I don't think any of that was employed in any of these risk assessments. The difference is between a large oak tree getting ready to fall into a busy intersection on Merriman Avenue versus a pine tree dropping a branch on a golf path. The likelihood of causing a significant impact is quite measurably less and could be mitigated with pruning. So without all of that information, it's really hard for me to say, yes, this is a good plan, or no, it's a failed plan, or a flawed plan. So, again, my question is, did your track arborist, do a comprehensive risk assessment on these trees?
You want me to jump in on this, Chris?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Well, before I talk about filling out track forms and golf course grass and trees, I want to bring something up that's been my experience with the commission going over, construction and tree projects. And that point I'd want to make is that it's a lot easier to visualize how decisions were made when you go on the field trip and see the trees versus when we're speaking in generalities and you've not gone on the field trip and seen the trees and understand the plan. I encountered this with
all due respect. This report is full of generalities. It doesn't have any specifics. So
let me finish though. When we went to Vermont Avenue, or when Vermont Avenue earlier in the process, the streetscape work was on the table. You would raise concerns about, how professional was this done, and were the appropriate processes followed and so forth. But then on site, looking at the trees, you would turn to me and say, this tree is going to go away, right? And it was because justifiably, in your eyes, my eyes, both as track qualified arborists, the tree needed to go. We weren't standing there filling out a track form to come to that conclusion. It was our experience and knowledge and training in the track process and in the site factors, the tree factors that bring a track qualified arborist to say, this tree probably shouldn't stay. Okay, and if we were still filling out track forms for every 141 trees or whatever, I'd need to have a full-time job doing that for the extent of the process, extent of the project. But since I have a full-time job doing other things as well, no, I didn't do track forms for all these trees, but experience and training and qualification enabled me to say, I can see why you would want to remove this tree. No, it's not necessarily going to fall down because its roots are rotting off, though there are trees that are in that situation. And some trees that I need to go back with a resistograph to see how bad they are. But it was evident that the trees in question could benefit the site and the people using the site by not being there.
Go ahead, Ed. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So my response to the 90 some odd people that sent in public comment, and including some certified and track arborists that had concerns with what's being reported, my response to them is, don't worry, just trust the city because they say they know what's best. It's basically what you're saying. Just trust me.
Did you expect the public to trust you when you work for the federal government, Ed? You're the professional working for the government. You would expect.
No, when I get called on not providing proper documentation, I would fall back and provide it. Mark, these are a lot of trees that are being removed, and I'm not sold on the fact that many trees could present that severe a risk that they have to be removed without other practices that could mitigate that risk.
I think, though, it's been clearly pointed out that not every tree removal is because that tree was going to fall down in the next 15 minutes and kill somebody, but because it was to the benefit of making the site functional for its intended purpose. So if we wanted to keep all the trees, then you can certainly have a non-functional, non-money-making golf course that looks, really rough. And I don't understand the point of having a city facility that doesn't perform its function. And I reiterate that if you would go on the walk around with Chris and see the trees for yourself, rather than forming opinions sight unseen, I think you would probably corroborate the vast majority of what I've seen and my impressions of it as a professional arborist and track qualified.
Thanks, Mark, for the
I'm happy to take anybody else for a tour if anybody wants to take one, for sure.
I'm sure you would. Okay, thank you. And Ed, thank you, because I did want to point out that I received an email from Commission member Sharon Sumrall, who's shared basically the same concern. And I think the concern is that what we're seeing on paper is hard to decipher from an, arboriculture perspective, if I could sum that up for you. Next hand up, I believe, was Karen.
Hi, thank you. I did get to go on the tour with Chris, and I also went on an additional tour with local arborist Chardon Dietrich. And I have a couple questions that I have from the community members that I've spoken to that I think will maybe just help with transparency. So just a couple questions to you, Chris. Are the arborists who have agreed to this report the ones that will be getting paid to do the work? So the private arborist, is that the same person that will be contracted to remove the trees?
It's possible, but not guaranteed. Nothing has been bid yet. So they would have to bid on the project and be low bidder, et cetera, in order to be the arborist that benefits from the report.
Okay. So when I went around with Chardon, we noticed that many of the trees marked for removal due to leaning could be responding to phototropism. So, and when trees grow like that, they have special compression and tension wood that helps to stabilize them. So they're potentially as stable as trees that are growing more vertically. So I just feel like that's important to have on record for the trees that are marked as leaning and slated for removal. My next question is, has a soil test been done by the agronomist who evaluated the golf course?
Yes. I would have to do some digging in my email, but we've had soil tests done on greens and, and excuse me, on a couple of the fairways as well.
Okay, I think that information would be really helpful to share, because it's possible that it's due to the deterioration of the soil that's causing the grass to not be as healthy as possible. And oak wilt is mentioned as the reason to remove mature oaks at hole 13. And I inquired further, and there was no lab test to confirm this diagnosis. So my background is in nursing, so we really rely on evidence-based research to inform best practices. And this prompted me to look into the best management practices for Carolina golf courses, which is a resource compiled by the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America with authors from Clemson and NC State University. And it notes on page 85 that nutrient deficiencies caused by poor soil can resemble diseases such as potassium or magnesium deficiency, which is why I think that soil test would be really helpful to share that information. And on 25, it discusses environmental protection strategies from the Best Management Practices Manual that emphasizes the incorporating of many natural features and areas in the design as possible to minimize disturbance of the existing ecology. Again, this is best practices to seek and create and preserve habitat areas that enhance the area's ecosystem. And lastly, from the best practices that I found while I was looking it over was page 35, which discusses the Audubon International Cooperative Sanctuary Program that was created to educate people about environmental stewardship. And there are 6 different areas that a golf course could be certified. And these are all in the best practices manual that I feel like, because this is city property and community trees, I feel like our community deserves us to be adhering to the best practices that we can. I just wanted to convey those concerns that I have received from community members.
Mm-hmm. And conveniently, actually, one of the 2 greens that we do have soil samples from is green 13, which is where those oak wilt trees are. That report, the greens soil sample actually literally came in today. I have not read it yet. The fairways was a month or 2 ago. So we will have some more information that I'll probably work with Mark on, because I'm not going to know enough about how that ties in with the oak wilt, but that'll be his world for sure.
All right. Karen, while you have the floor, did you have one more thing real quick? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. So it's also important to note that glyphosate can chelate minerals in the soil. So if the test includes a glyphosate level, that would be indicative of whether or not the minerals in the soil are even available to the surrounding plants.
Thank you. Mark, next.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify a point about trees on the edges of the roughs. I don't know if that's the right term for the wooded part, but the concern with those, a lot of them is not that the tree is going to fail because it doesn't have adequate compensatory roots on the tension side of the tree or something. The problem is in terms of use of the site as a golfer, subordinated edge trees that had to grow out at a drastic angle to get to sunlight. Those ones you can attempt pruning solutions, but you're not going to be doing ANSI 300 compliant pruning. You're going to be doing some pretty god-awful pruning to a lot of those trees. And so rather than trying to attempt that on a routine basis year after year to try and keep back trees that were younger and smaller than more established trees and grew out into the flight path of the golf balls, just removing them at ground level and allowing the trees behind them and all the many trees that are coming up in those wooded stands, because oak trees drop acorns, annually. The stand in itself is creating more forest, and that's actually how this site got as rough and woody as it is. If you look at aerial photography comparing this site with any other golf course or all of them, which I did in the Asheville area, this is a very furry golf course. The majority of golf courses in the area, you can see why they would have gone with that 500 or 1,000 tree removal plan, because that's how they get enough light to grow grass.
Thank you. Next hand up was Cecil.
Yeah, I'm not enough of an expert on trees to offer any useful information or even to ask a smart question. But I do find it wryly amusing that the removal of these, 150 trees or whatever, is estimated to cost about as much as we're going to ask for to preserve all the trees in Asheville next year. Doing a study and creating a urban forestry plan. It just seems boggling to me that amount of money is necessary to cut down trees.
To be clear, that budget is not only the removal, it's the removal, the pruning, and the purchase, replacement, and planting of another 150. So the removal portion is roughly 100, just for clarity.
Okay. Well, that makes me feel a little better. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick?
Yes, just to make sure I'm reading this chart correctly. There's 6 trees slated for removal for golf purposes. Is that correct?
Sorry, Chris, you're muted. Thank you.
2025, I won't do that again. So that's the trees that I mentioned earlier, that the 2 arborists, including Mark, said, I can't give you a good arborist justification for why this tree should come down. If you're bringing this tree down, it is strictly for golf purposes. And so a good number of those we did move to the prune cycle, but there are some that we have listed as remove, and those were it's perfectly healthy tree, to be completely upfront. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no hazard with it other than it's directly affecting golf play in a significant way.
So then the rest of the trees that are slated for removal are being removed either because, using the generic terminology, they pose a hazard, or they're dying, or they're having some impact on the ability to grow turf for the fairways and greens. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Yeah, or they are invasive, because there are a couple invasives on there that are healthy. Yeah. But yes, that would be a good generalization to recap it. Correct.
So, I understand the need to remove some trees for strictly golf purposes. Although I don't like that, I understand that that's just par for the course, pardon my pun. But I would think that for the rest of the trees that are slated for removal, I think that where Ed was going and others is that we should make every effort to see whether those trees can be preserved, whether it's for another 2 years, another 15 years, as opposed to just having them removed. And so I would agree that we need to have a more technical assessment of the trees that are slated for removal.
And I don't want to put Mark on the spot here, but I'm about to, so I apologize, Mark. But I guess I would note, I've not had involvement with the golf course until January of this year, just to be upfront. I have been around the golf course for about a decade. I'm not a golfer, just in the general area. But Is it correct, Mark, in that within the first year or two of Pope Golf coming into operating, they were proposing a significant tree removal plan, but they couldn't, one, get funding, and two, there wasn't a lot of city support for it, so they stopped pushing for it. And it was for all of these same reasons. Is that accurate?
I think I recall it about that way, yes.
Yeah. And so I guess what I would say is this is not new. It's just that there has not been funding for it ever before. And we're about to invest a significant amount of money, both from the Tourism Development Authority and from the city, to really upfit that course and make it financially sustainable for years to come. And it's that opportunity to really do something that city and county and a private operator in the past have all wanted to do, tried to do, and been unsuccessful in doing. And that could make a really big boost for that neighborhood and that golf course long term. And we're meeting city ordinances and policy with the replanting plan and the total overall canopy. So it feels to me, and I understand everyone has different views, but it feels like a really big win-win-win type of situation right now. And it's an opportunity that might not come again for a long, long time.
And my final question and comment would be, I didn't hear quite a firm commitment to get responses to the questions that Karen raised.
Yeah, I can certainly get answers to the various questions, including the soil test. That's no problem at all.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, back to Cecil.
Yeah, I know we're not discussing things other than trees particularly, but since Chris raised the idea that part of this is to make the course fiscally successful, I'm wondering if there's been consideration of raising the greens fees. They seem remarkably low compared to other golf courses.
They
and
are.
maybe the condition is bad, but it's considered a highly touted design for a golf course. And I wonder if the golfers shouldn't be paying more of the load.
Yes. So the greens fees are actually essentially the same as they were in 2015. They haven't had any significant rate increases. Pope told me as they were on their way out that they have not increased it because they felt like the quality of the course dictated that they had to keep it at a lower rate, especially with inflation and the increase in usage over the last few years. We are planning on doing a rate increase starting on April 1st. So there'll be not a huge increase for locals, but anybody that does not have a City of Asheville address will have locals, City of Asheville residents, the rate goes up roughly 5%. For non-City of Asheville residents, which is county and anywhere beyond, it's pretty significant in the 20% range. And we do have a planned scope for that out-of-market rate to go up even more once we complete renovations. Using examples from both Wilmington, Charleston, and of course outside of Philadelphia, it's not abnormal for the out-of-market rate to be triple that of the local rate to help the course be more financially stable.
Thank you.
Yep.
Zoe, you'll be next one. So I just wanted to myself piggyback on what Cecil just mentioned. And I know this isn't purely a tree piece of this, but I do want to highlight, Chris mentioned at the beginning of his presentation how historically significant and locally significant this golf course is, particularly for equity and the Black golf community. And I do think it's extremely important for the overall golf course restoration. So I just want to highlight that. And of course, we're concerned about the trees. That's why we're all sitting here. And so I don't know if anyone with the specific concerns about tree health is ready to step up and propose to be the one to look at them themselves. I'm not a certified arborist, so I cannot help with that myself. But maybe that's something that this group could help with even more. But I do think that we've had a good conversation with the city to this point. And as far as the UFC, as long as we stay with communication and moving forward, that's what we can provide. And then recommendations for how they can move forward with a more sustainable tree approach. Also, Chris didn't mention, but he did on our golf cart trip through the golf course that the city is looking at some of the more sustainable maintenance practices, such as the fertilizers and things like that. It's all over the golf community, and from my understanding, talking to Chris, we are not going to be an exception to that trend in moving toward more sustainable golf course management practices. So he can address that further, but I just wanted to highlight that. All right, then Zoe, go ahead.
And actually, the two things I was going to mention have directly to do with what Amy mentioned. First, I was actually very impressed with the project as a whole, especially the prospect of restoring some of the wetland capacity and removing a lot of the invasives that are not listed on here, as well as what could be perceived as invasive trees. So I think if there's and this is just my suggestion, I'm not an expert, but if there is a reevaluation of the trees to be cut, I would limit those to the actual oak trees of a certain size and over, just to kind of keep the scope of the work reasonable. I personally also really like shortleaf pines, but I accepted the reason for removing those, and they're all in one place. So if anybody else has concerns about that, they could also look at that area. The second thing that I was going to mention also is that the two callers talked about maintenance practices and what the future of those would be in terms of chemicals. And I think that's a really good point that might be conveyed to the public to allay some of those fears. So those were just the 2 points that I was going to bring up.
And we certainly can on the chemicals specifically. That's, a lot of the reason behind why you see articles throughout the country of tree removal happening at golf courses is due to changes in EPA regulations and that the inputs that you can put into golf courses are very, very different from what they were 15 years ago. So course superintendents are actually significantly more reliant on water, airflow, and sunlight than they used to be in the past, which is good, right? Because you have runoff and it pollutes the rivers and all the various things. But then it also requires significantly more access to sun and airflow and water. So that's why we're trying to retain the water for the irrigation, lift up the canopy, and in places remove so that we can get all three of those things.
Thank you. What other questions do we have for Chris while we have him here? As a group, of course, our goal, our mandate is to advise City Council. That's another thing I just wanted to address real quick. In a lot of the comments and emails I received, they were asking the Urban Forestry Commission to reject this plan, but we actually don't have any power to do so. We can make recommendations to City Council, as can any citizen. So that might be a recommendation for the citizenry who is concerned that City Council might have more of a say than we do as a group. We're here to coordinate, help, assist, and really look after the trees that are present and the ones that'll go in for the future. So we do not have power to just unilaterally reject this plan. So what we can do, if anybody so chose as this group, we can provide recommendations. And I believe Chris has heard our concerns, and our recommendations would be maybe one more completely separate arborist report, someone who's not going to be involved in removal, not involved with the city, and not going to benefit down the line from tree removal, as someone else to go out and conduct a report for the trees that are still slated for removal. That would be one recommendation. The second would be, I do not see here yet, and maybe we're just not there yet, but any specifics about the replanting plan, what species would be going in. That's another thing that this group would be concerned with. Obviously, we want native species. If we're taking out a bunch of oaks, how many more can we put in appropriate places, for example? So those would be the recommendations that I would have just informally to Chris as the director. But as a group, we could make more formal recommendations if we choose. So Ed, go ahead. Sorry, Ed, you're on mute before you get too far there.
I would like to see, for those trees that are being removed because they're hazardous, I would like to see that risk assessment conducted according to A300 Part 9 and the best accompanying best management practice, because I don't think that was done. And we have to keep in mind that some of these are pretty mature oak trees, and it's a historic golf course. And these trees are part of the golf course's history. And I think that we really should be as cautious as possible making decisions to remove these trees and to use techniques to mitigate any risk or to improve shade or to offset any negative effect on playing the game of golf in our decision to remove. So it's the responsibility of this commission to do what we can to preserve Asheville's canopy, and canopy counts everywhere, even on golf courses. So it's my suggestion.
Perfect. Thank you. Patrick?
Yeah, I agree, Madam Chair, with your list of recommendations as well as the one that Ed just made. I would like to see those recommendations be formalized with a list and a vote.
That works for me. Do we want to write that up for a future meeting or verbalize it now while we're here?
Well, we don't meet again until February, correct?
Yeah, technically that's correct.
So I'm not really clear on the time frame here, whether that would give us enough time to make recommendations to hopefully influence or affect the plan, or whether these trees will start coming down by then. I don't know.
It's possible. We can just verbalize it and vote on it as a recommendation, if that works as well.
I think that's what we should do.
Okay. Before we get there, Karen?
I would like to just reiterate the need for information about the soil test and the minerals and herbicides like glyphosate to be in that. Thank you.
Okay. Before I make this motion, Ed, what was the specific standard that you referenced previously?
It's A300 Part 9.
A300 Part 9. Okay.
ANSI A300 Part 9.
Okay. So I think I have it here if we're ready. So usually I don't make the motion because I'm not sure with the chair thing, but since I have it all written down here, I'm going to go ahead and do it. So I move that as the Urban Forestry Commission, we recommend to City Council and to the Director of the Golf Course Renovation that a certified arborist who is independent of this project does a review for all trees slated for removal using ANSI 300 Part 9 standards and reporting that back to this commission. We would like to see a specific and detailed replanting plan, including species and abundance of those species to be planted, to exclude any non-native invasive species and focus on native species that can replace the ones that have been removed. And lastly, we would request information on soil testing and the use of herbicides and other chemicals on the golf course, and the soil tests to confirm the hazard and oak wilt trees if possible. So that's the motion. Need a second?
I second.
Any discussion or corrections on the motion? Go ahead, Ed. You're on mute. Go ahead and come off mute. You're fine.
I would like to add one more thing, and that's to also explore alternatives to removal where there are issues related to shade and turf conflicts.
Okay. So the amended motion includes the fourth line item to explore alternatives to removal for all trees slated for removal to include pruning and other practices. Zoe? Go ahead, you're on mute too. You can go ahead and come off. We can all just chat.
Again, I would, I'm looking at the list and, you know, there's a whole bunch of white pines on hole 5 that are dying hazard or replaced, do we want this arborist to have to go through and evaluate all of the trees or the ones that we're most concerned about?
I would say, based on the community voices that we heard, that our request should include for one more arborist review for all trees. But, you know, we're just asking. So we're just going to ask. So, okay, is everybody, go ahead.
Madam Chair, as the person who seconded the motion, I agree with Ed's amendment to the motion.
Perfect, thank you. And Chris?
One quick question related to the replanting plan and specific varieties. Since we aren't planning to replant until the fall, does that need to come before any trees start being removed, or just a commitment of size of canopy and then come back later in the summer when we actually know like what varieties are available to us locally and what they are with the replanting portion of the plan?
I'd be okay with that as long as it's before they go in.
Yeah.
Because we can see, and just so everybody's aware, there's stakes in the ground for the proposed locations of the trees based on the full plan of the renovation. And if you're out there, there's a couple places, and Chris mentioned this, where there's pieces of the golf course and there's no golfing. And so the goal is to really saturate some of those areas with more trees, even beyond what's there now. So anyway, the point of that is, yes, Chris, I'm okay with that if we can come back and keep in communication when it comes time for the replanting.
Yeah, and just because you mentioned the stakes, we have had some issues of people taking our stakes and taking the ribbons off of the trees. So we've been trying to keep up with getting those back on. They're kind of checking every day or two, but you may see something that looks like it should be there or was and hasn't. That's just because we're dealing with that currently, but we're putting them back as quickly as we can.
Okay, understood. Okay, so back to our motion and second on the table. Is everybody clear on our 4 points that we are requesting? And this is a request to go to City Council as well as the project managers for the renovation. Yeah. Mark, is it about the motion? Go ahead.
Yeah, procedural question about the assessment. If we understand that there's a continuum on these proposed removals between something that is exclusively golf related and something that is exclusively risk related, and there's a blend of those in between, the person doing the assessment on removal of, you know, this long list of trees, they're not going to have high risk ratings on plenty of the trees that need to come out.
I agree.
And so how is that
community
factored into this assessment process?
It may not be, and that's what the community has requested, is they want to know more about the details of all of these trees. And, you know, maybe the category changes and more of these are labeled as golf purposes than hazard, you know. So, but that's a separate discussion than the lack of detail in this report. Does that make sense?
Sure.
That's what I'm seeing is the difference. So,
okay.
All right. Good. Let's go ahead and vote on our motion as our recommendation. So starting with Ed.
Aye.
Zoe.
Aye.
Thank you. Cecil.
Aye.
Patrick.
Aye.
Karen.
Aye.
And I vote aye. So the recommendation passes. And I guess I just want to sum up by thanking Chris and Mark for all the work up to this point, and reiterate that what Chris said, if we want to take another tour and everybody wants to go out and be on site and look at some of this, let's do that. I found it to be extremely helpful to put everything in perspective on what's going on out there. So, all right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Moving on. So since we amended the agenda, we are now on old business, starting with working group updates. Real quick, what we added to the agenda for transparency and organization was working group members listed on the agenda in a separate section, but I made a mistake, and the budget working group, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, should not include Patrick, but should include Zoe. I believe that was the change we made last time. So just a correction on the budget working group. Okay, so starting though with policy working group, I believe Patrick has an update for that one.
Yes, we just recently received the city's suggested amendments for the tree canopy preservation ordinance 719. I asked Chris Collins to, well, let me back up. The policy working group met last week to go over that document. Sharon Summerall did her own independent deep analysis of the document. And Ed and I were the only ones who were available for the policy group meeting. We took Sharon's detailed analysis and went through all the proposed changes in detail. I won't go into the details right now because we, Ed and I, want to put our comments in the Google document that Chris provided us today so the city can see those, and then we can share those with the rest of the commission. I'll just generally say that, you know, about a third of their recommendations we agree with, about a third we don't agree with, and about a third we have questions about. So once we get those comments into that document for the city to review, we'll share that information with the rest of the commission. Ed, do you have anything further to say? No? Okay. So that's where we are, probably in all likelihood, because the Christmas holidays are quickly approaching. We're not likely to actually sit down with city staff and go back and forth on those recommendations until after the first of the year. So I'll be glad to take any questions if anyone has any. Oh, I will say in one detail, the city did add heritage trees as a mention of that as one of their amendments. However, they didn't have any description of what a heritage tree is. Ed wrote one to include in the revisions of Chapter 20. We will include that same description in 719.
Okay. Any questions for Patrick or the policy group? All right. Thanks, Patrick, for all your work on that. It's awesome.
On Chapter 20, I saw in Mark's update that he's still reviewing what we did with Chapter 20 with what Department of Public Works is doing, and that still has to be reviewed, I guess, by higher ups. I'm hoping that we will get to take a look at what's the city staff has done to Chapter 20 after the first of the year, and review that, and then get a meeting with the city to, again, go back and forth and come to some kind of resolution.
All right, good, thank you. And we'll talk in a minute about our annual retreat, but I imagine that a chunk of time will be so that we can all get together on where we're at with policy, because it sounds like it's all going to be coming together around that time. So we'll plan ahead for that. Thank you. Was that it? Any questions? All right, so the budget request working group, I know Dawn isn't here, but I saw some emails that they were coordinating a meeting. Anyone here, did y'all have a meeting?
Yes, we did. Dawn and Ed and I met yesterday to talk about the budget, and it's good news that we got the urban forester position through in the last budget session, and going forward, it's pretty clear that to accomplish our goals, including the urban forest management plan, we need to assess what we already have. And so the two pieces of that seem to be at the low end, maybe 150,000 for the assessment of our current forest, and then perhaps another 75,000 for creating the plan. So we're suggesting that a minimum ask might be $225,000. Maybe we should aim for 275,000 as an initial ask, because we'll get pushback, no doubt. And if the pushback goes far enough, the assessment would be the thing we mostly need to get first before we have the basis for creating the plan. So that's what we arrived at our meeting. Do you have anything to add, Ed? You're muted.
This is related to the group that's working on the Urban Forest Master Plan. And I started yesterday converting the documents that we have into a scope of work for the comprehensive Urban Forest Master Plan and in the inventory. And we'll be able to commingle the documents from the budget working group with the master plan working group. So we'll have a single unified budget request with all of that information contained. And I should have that done. I'm hoping to get that scope of work completed within a week.
Great.
Perfect. And then just to pigtail on that, since we're all together, so then the master plan group can come in and take a look at that and have something sort of finalized to send to both the urban forester when they're hired and the budget working group for the request. So perfect.
Yep.
And then Patrick.
Yeah, Cecil, was that $275,000 figure the amount that you're suggesting we ask the city for?
Yes, that's an idea we came up with. We think it'll be less than that, but we also think whatever we ask for, we won't be getting.
And maybe this will come up at a later item, Madam Chair, but we had, I think, some discussion about whether or not we could use any of the fee in lieu funds to help pay for this. Is that still on the table, or have we not got any kind of affirmative response from the city about how those fee in lieu funds can actually be spent?
Yeah, the latter part of that is correct. I would not hold my breath for fee in lieu funds. It would definitely be something we could integrate into an ask, or recommend that those funds be used in that way. But I have a feeling, this is just my interpretation, that that's going to get messy and tied up and might have trouble getting pushed through. I could be wrong, and city council just makes the decision and uses the money in a specific way. But my guess would be that may not be so easy. So again, something we can request, but I don't see that being an easy process, at least until the urban forester is in place. Nancy?
Right, I think
Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, the last discussion I believe we had with the city, which I believe included the assistant city attorney, was that the fee in lieu funds could be used for anything other than operational costs. So in other words, it could be used for one-time expenditures, which of course this would be.
Yeah, it's my understanding that would be an acceptable use under the ordinance, but I think that's a separate thing from actually getting approval to spend the money in any specific way. But yes, you are right that our guidance was that is a use under the umbrella the way the ordinance is written.
Thank you.
Nancy?
I was just going to add, and Chris may chime in here, that to use fee in lieu funds, they have to be used within the resource management district from which they come. We currently do not have, as in the report you can see, funds in all the resource management districts, which would be part of potentially an issue with pooling funds to have a citywide plan. But of course, we would always check with legal.
Yeah. But that's a good point, that the way it's written, there might have to be like an equal amount in each of those baskets to be able to use it in that way. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Chris, go ahead. It looks like that's what you're going to say.
You guys got to exactly the place I was going to say. That's the greatest difficulty using those right now, is that we don't have money in each district yet. So
makes sense. All right, Patrick.
Well, what is the likelihood that we would have fee in lieu money in the CBD?
Actually, that's the one that we would expect to have plenty, because they don't have a requirement. Is that their requirements are less, and so we would expect I guess I don't know. But I would think that the way it was written, it should be an option even for Central Business District. Chris, go ahead.
Just adding my insight to that from talking to applicants and developers. A lot of downtown projects, smaller downtown projects, don't involve new buildings. And when they do, they're pretty large, and we haven't seen this come to fruition yet, but we are seeing plans drawn up that do include fee in lieu. So I think once some of these come along, you will see that. Although the requirements are smaller, there's less room to plant trees, and they're generally less interested in doing it. So, yeah.
Okay. Good. Any other questions on that point? So that really kind of brought us into the fee in lieu working group, which we've really just still been talking about all these same issues and trying to kind of figure out like what would a framework look like. Something we could help the urban forester with their job when it's time. So nothing new in that group. Urban Forest Master Plan, Ed already gave us the update. We're working on a scope of work so that when we do have the urban forester, we can be, here's what we envision, and go from there. And that will then help the budget working group as well with what our overall ask for budget. Between all of those working groups, anything I missed? Any questions? And at our retreat, we'll deep dive into all of these as well. The last one is our newest working group, the recommended species list. I know we just initiated this group, but Karen?
Well, I got really fired up to work on this list when I accessed it through American Legal. I accessed it through the UDO on American Legal, but I think it was just accidentally, the older version was transported to American Legal from Unicode. So the updated version that Sharon has is fantastic. She's done a really great job on it. I had seen the old version and noticed that Bradford Pear was on it and Burning Bush was on it, and was like, wait a minute, that has to go, but she's already done that. And so we've moved on to focusing on native species and perhaps including a cover letter, including or focusing on promoting native trees and shrubs for pollinators, and recommending that people leave the leaves for pollinators, a little bit of education perhaps ahead of the recommended species list. And along with that, some research on native trees regarding their suitability for street trees, yard, parking lots, downtown settings, and other things that are based on the RSL from, I think it's in Georgia, Decatur, Georgia, that maybe Ed suggested as a guideline. And then two other species that were recommended by local arborists perhaps to be added are black locust, which is a pioneer species in Catalpa. So maybe just we can consider those additions. And then I had a couple questions about, I understand that the UFC is working on improvements for the silvicells criteria. And I think that some public folks, including myself, would like to know where that stands. And also could we get a public update on the code for the developers to maintain street trees for 2 years, where that is in the process, if possible?
Yeah, so hold your two questions. I just saw Mark's hand go up. Did that relate to recommended species list?
Yeah, the standard specifications and detailed manual as it still exists has, sorry, I'm gonna take my hand down. There we go. Has the old list, because that's the new list. I don't think ever made it onto the detailed manual yet, because it hadn't finished going through its update process. So the list that is newer and longer and has far more species and far more categories and whatever than the old list. My experience of sharing that with homeowners when I want to know what type of tree might you be interested in having back in your yard, it makes their eyes roll up in their head. There's so many options there and so many categories, so many pages. So my request on behalf of those citizens is if the new species list can sort of be in between the old one and the last new one somewhere, as far as how thick it is, it would make it more user friendly for our citizens. And probably, anybody who's trying to, comply with building development rules, and they're not tree people. It would make it a lot easier for them. That's just a suggestion.
Yeah, I'd be happy to communicate with you more on that, because I imagine you hear a lot more from people that are working with the list. So however we can make the list as most user-friendly as possible.
One idea, I really liked what Karen said, that they're creating like a cover letter with information. And I think that's an excellent idea, because, even the developers like to get that information. Maybe in there somewhere, there's like a box of, kind of the homeowner highlights or something like that. Because the downside with limiting the list too far is then we have a whole city of, only a handful of species, which we want to avoid as well. So there's a fine line there.
Right. And, things that are actually available in nurseries, that's important information too. I don't know how many nurseries are growing some of the trees that, would look good on the list, if people can't get a hold of them. Kind of frustrating for them.
Yeah. Anyone have any questions for Karen? Ed?
Yeah, to answer Karen's other question regarding silvicells, the committee that was working on that was looking at broader issues than just silvicells, but more focused on planting requirements, soil buy-in requirements, third-party inspections for newly planted trees, things like that. And I know the committee's work is done. I don't know where the city is with rolling out all of the work that the committee has done. There are still some occasional, like, I guess, for lack of a better word, loose ends. Vidila sends messages out to the group asking some questions, and we've had one recent recommendation to him that complements the Urban Forest Master Plan, and that's to develop a detailed downtown planting plan, so that we'd have specific trees for locations based on exposure, width of sidewalk, available soil volume, things like that. Rather than trying to cookbook everything that gets planted, we have an actual plan in place. So, I guess one thing I can do is circle back with Vidil and ask him what his timeline is to roll this stuff out, but I don't really know where they are at this point beyond that.
All right, thank you. Patrick?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether this is the appropriate place in the agenda to bring this up, but I did want to bring it on the commission's radar. The city has hired a consultant to study the missing middle housing issue in the city of Asheville, and that initiative is being led by Planning and Urban Design, and I understand that there's been some discussion about exempting certain missing middle housing projects from the tree canopy preservation ordinance. As far as I know, it's just preliminary discussion about this. In terms of the Coalition of Asheville Neighborhoods, we have already got a recommendation from Planning and Urban Design that if they put together any kind of task force or group that would delve more deeply into the missing middle housing issue, that can be at that table. I think it would be worth our effort to get the same kind of pledge from Planning and Urban Design, that the Urban Forestry Commission also be not only represented at that table, but if that the consultant is going to talk to stakeholders about missing middle housing, that the Urban Forestry Commission be one of those stakeholders.
Okay. I think that is definitely worth talking about. Let's hold that for just a moment. I do think we can work that in here where we're talking about our working groups. But I did want to circle back before we got too far away from Karen's second question. There was the one about the silvicells and planting. That's part of the standards and specifications update that Ed was talking about. Sorry, pardon me. What was your second question that I already forgot?
I have heard that the UFC was developing some requirements for developers to maintain street trees for 2 years after planting, or something along those lines, something about ongoing maintenance and care for street trees. And I was just wondering where that stands.
Ed, I don't know if you have that one too. I believe that's in the ordinance.
Yeah, newly planted trees under the canopy amendment are required in perpetuity. So I think that's there. Any tree that meets the canopy requirement gets recorded on the plat with the development, and those trees have to be maintained forever.
The issue historically has been enforcement, and our hope is that along with the urban forester, not that they would go around doing all the enforcement, but sort of be the point of contact to help with enforcement in kind of all of our tree issues, because I think that's where that one falls aside.
Right, and with third-party inspections, we can ensure that the trees are planted correctly according to standard details and their quality plant material. So, and then with some enforcement, I think that we'll be in good shape with that.
Okay, so before we go forward, I'll make sure we got all that. Are we good with those questions? Thank you. I'm going to come back to Patrick's point about the missing middle housing, but I wanted to get to the hands up. Nancy, did you still have something? Or you?
I was going to say, I believe that council has requested that Padilla continue to work on the landscaping amendments, because both of those questions are under the landscaping amendments that Padilla is working on and has been working on with working groups. They want the urban forester on board to take a look at those before they pass anything.
Okay, so on hold and in progress.
Well, in progress. He's still working on them. I'm getting emails right now. So.
Gotcha. Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, Cecil.
I was thinking to address Mark's concerns about the overchoice. I wonder if it'd be possible to go through the list, and I would volunteer to do this, and I might regret it, and see if there's some way to asterisk the species that are available in the area, readily available. I mean, I don't know exactly how you define it, but you know, if you find species that nobody here locally carries, there should be some way to differentiate that so that homeowners it can limit their choices.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. Thank you. And so I'll just put that to Karen and Sharon that they can loop you in on their discussions as they work on the list. So you're on the working group now. Way to go.
Hey.
All right. Well, thank you. That's a good idea. Okay. So did we get all of those? Okay. So back to the missing middle housing through planning and urban development. You know, however we want to tackle this, I propose that maybe it starts with the chair reaching out through the contacts in the city and seeing if we can be, you know, sort of brought into the fold with that discussion. And if that's not a favorable response with that level of outreach, then we can push it in some other way. That's an idea. Patrick?
I think that's a good idea. I would send your email request to Todd Oklachaney and Videla, because Videla is actually heading this initiative.
Perfect. Got it. Okay. Well, then I'll start with that as a task for myself, and I'll report back at the retreat or sooner if need be where we're at with that. Any other discussion on that that piece there? It sounds like it's in the works, so we'll add it to the agenda as a line item that we can revisit as old business. All right. Then we are at, okay, the boards and commissions realignment. So I don't know if everybody saw it, it was hidden in the news, but the official boards and commissions realignment has been pulled by City Council. That is no longer on the table at all. There is an active citizen working group working on behind the scenes to assess boards and commissions as a whole and see if there is still the need for any sort of improvement or revision there. So you hopefully received a survey as a current member of a volunteer advisory board to complete the survey and provide feedback on your experience to that group. So I would encourage you to do so. That information is just currently going to be used to help that working group, get a feel for people's experiences and if there is even a need to realign or reassess or re-envision working groups. So there is now a new working group working on working groups. So any questions on that? I do encourage you to take the survey. It'll be helpful to the people who, and Sharon is deeply involved in this, so she would appreciate the feedback as well. All right. We also kept on the agenda the Duke Energy Rankin Street project. There is no motion going on there. There's nothing in the works that we've seen. Haley and I trying to keep tabs on if there is a public meeting that they have suggested, but nothing's going on. So we're just keeping it on the agenda for now in case something happens. Eventually it might fall off, but it's still out there. There's still websites that talk about this potential project, but as far as we know, nothing's happening. So that's the update, nothing new. We already discussed the municipal golf course tree project. Brings us to the annual retreat. You should have all received a Google invitation to the retreat, Friday, January 13th at 9 a.m. We'll have a good Friday the 13th meeting. It'll be in person at the Public Works Building. We're having it in room A109. If you're familiar with that room, it has the big doors that open up on the side. So if need be, we can open the doors. So bring a coat so that we can ventilate as needed. So hopefully we can get all members to be there. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, current advice from the city is that masks are not required in public buildings, but if that changes, we will let everyone know, but it's optional if you would like to attend in person, and we really hope everybody will be there. So the other piece to that is that we're gonna have just a optional voluntary fun lunch after. So maybe mark your calendar for grabbing some lunch. This would be a just informal us going out and hanging out. Any questions on the retreat? Oh, if you have retreat agenda ideas, please send them to me as soon as possible. I'm going to start putting that all together. The actual agenda for the retreat will need to be finalized about a week before the meeting, but give me your ideas as soon as you have them so I can start working on that. All right. Lastly, on old business, we put this on old business. If you recall, this group made a recommendation to City Council to purchase the Ravenscroft Reserve, the piece of land on, I believe, Collier Avenue downtown, one of the last remaining stands of mature oak trees in the Central Business District. Ed, did you want to give us an update, or I can as well?
Yeah, there's really not too much to add. The land has transferred ownerships and the price has gone up considerably. I understand the last land transfer was in the $2.5 million price range. So it sort of kind of killed any possibility of raising money to purchase the land at this point. And it's just too far out of reach. And So the Ravenscroft Reserve folks are basically taking a time out to see what happens, from what I understand. I don't even think we need to include this as old business in the future. I'm not sure.
Yeah, for now, this will be the last update. But we just wanted to let everybody know that it did change hands, and the price is very high. So, but I'll throw it out there. If there's anybody in the community that feels very strongly about trees, would still be an option. All right. Anything else? Go ahead, Patrick.
Was there any effort to look nationally for funding organizations or individuals who might be interested in contributing money, if not all the money that would be needed to purchase and protect this property?
I'll defer that question to Karen, since she was on the board, the Ravenscroft board.
We feel pretty comfortable in that we exhausted every funding opportunity we could. We were working with supporters in New York, and we reached out to every possible person we could. We were up against, politically speaking, it was difficult. It was an uphill battle to get support because of the affordable housing component from the original developers. So the message is really more educational than anything else at this point, that sustainability and affordability should go together. They shouldn't be in conflict with each other.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else there, we'll move on to new business. So the annual report, I was hoping to have a draft for you all, but I am a little behind. Once I do get a draft ready, I will circulate it so that if I miss anything or you have anything to add to our annual report, you'll have an opportunity to take a look at it before it's submitted to City Council, which it's usually due around the middle of January. So I'll have something this month for everyone to take a look at. Next, we have our membership and election of officers. So the first piece of this is that, well, first of all, very, very sadly, Ed Macy's term is up as an official member of the Urban Forestry Commission after December. I won't even say after this meeting. You have the whole month to keep going. Ed will be staying on as a subject matter expert and consultant in our working groups, but a non-voting member of the commission. So I just first want to formally thank Ed on behalf of the commission for all of your service and mentorship and expertise. So thank you so much. I'm sure everybody agrees that you are, invaluable. We cannot do this without you. So thank you. Feel free to speak if you want, but since we're running short on time. Patrick's term was up, but he accepted a renewal for another term. And then we had one open seat to replace Ed, which brings up the question. It's actually not officially in our bylaws and procedures for choosing new members to the commission. So historically, we've just kind of had informal conversations, and the chair and vice chair get together and review all of the applications and come to an agreement on who will be chosen. If we have time, sometimes it actually bypasses us and goes straight to City Council, because ultimately they are who is deciding on the commission members. So for the replacement for Ed, we did have the applications. Dawn and I reviewed them. And again, we don't actually decide. We just make a recommendation to City Council, and they typically go with our recommendation, but that won't be officially voted on till their December or January meeting? I think it's their next meeting coming up, if I'm not wrong. I don't know if Haley or Nancy know when that actually happens, but it's coming up. We'll have the new member in place for December in time for our retreat. Patrick?
Can you tell us who you recommended?
I don't know. I think so. We recommended the arborist. He might even not know this yet. I don't know how to pronounce the first name. Chardin Dietrich. I know, Karen, you've worked with him. But that was our recommendation this time. It was hard. There was actually The applications were incredibly qualified. All of the applicants were arborists and urban foresters and Forest Service retirees. It was actually a very hard decision. This was a huge batch of qualified people. It made me feel ill-qualified to be on this group with the applications that were there. So if anyone's watching, we really appreciate that. It was amazing. But we had to recommend one to City Council. So that was where we ended up.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Then we need to elect officers for next year. So we need to take nominations and have a vote for chair and vice chair. I guess we can start with chair. Patrick.
Yeah, I move that we keep Amy Smith as chairperson of our commission.
Thank you.
I second.
Thank you. I am happy to accept after a vote, unless anyone else is really wanting leadership. Obviously, we can open that door. It is wide open. So anyone wants it, but if there are no other nominations, then we can take a vote. All right. So voting for the re-election of myself, Amy Smith, as chair. Ed?
Aye.
Zoe?
Aye.
Cecil?
Aye.
Patrick?
Aye.
Karen?
Aye.
And I believe I don't vote on that. So that passes. Thank you. I'm flattered and I'll do my best to keep up with this. So thank you.
You've really been doing great. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. I talked to Dawn. She said she would accept the nomination for vice chair unless someone else wanted to step up. Was there any interest in vice chair from anyone who's here right now?
I would move
Patrick.
that we nominate Dawn Chavez to continue as our vice chair.
Okay.
Second.
And a second. If there's no discussion, we can vote. All right. For Dawn Chavez as vice chair, Ed?
Aye.
Zoe?
Aye.
Cecil?
Aye.
Patrick?
Aye.
Karen?
Aye.
And I vote aye. So Dawn will remain as vice chair. All right. Well, thank you. That piece is done. Go ahead, Zoe.
Yeah, as far as, are we limited in the number of members that we have? Thinking that we got so many qualified people wanting to be on our group.
Currently, yes, it's in the ordinances. So it is through statute how many people. However, we are trying to kind of work on that because there's some wording in there for these historic members. For example, a representative from Duke Energy and a representative from MSD. One or two of those are non-voting, so it's not, really a big deal. However, we have talked about kind of opening that up so we could get more voices in the group, but it'll have to go through the ordinance revision. So we can certainly take a look at where we're at with that at the retreat for membership, because we have discussed that as a possibility.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Anything else? All right. I believe we can scratch the next item for the appeal review committee, or Nancy, do we still want to talk about that?
No, we can scratch it.
Pardon me. All right, so we will remove that item from the agenda. Lastly was the recommendation for heritage trees. So Karen?
So this will take about a minute to read through. Should I just read through it and then we vote on it? Okay.
We'll read through it and then we'll just need a motion and a second to accept it. But go ahead and read the recommendation.
Okay. Preservation of heritage trees. Whereas heritage trees are an important and valuable ecological, economic, aesthetic, and social asset to the community. And whereas the Asheville Urban Forestry Commission, UFC, recognizes that the preservation of this valuable resource is not only a benefit to the community at large, but also provides for our long-term sustainability and climate resilience. And whereas the UFC therefore further recognizes that the stewardship of heritage trees across all land ownerships is important to the city of Asheville and all its residents in order to A, protect, conserve, and enhance the city's attractiveness in its aesthetic and scenic environment. B, encourage and assure the continuation of quality community development where existing heritage trees are incorporated into any development and accorded proper maintenance and protection as part of the city's urban forest. C, protect and enhance property values. D, continue to provide a broad range of ecological and environmental services, including 1, a buffer against noise and wind and the provision of privacy. 2, improvement in air quality through the interception of particulate matter and production of oxygen. 3, the interception of rainwater, thus reducing stormwater runoff. 4, as components of urban forest canopy, provision of shade and evaporative cooling, resulting in the conservation of energy and a reduction of urban heat island effect. 5, the sequestration of carbon, reducing our carbon footprint. 6, the provision of habitat for animals, migratory songbirds, and critical pollinators. 7, improved human health and well-being by providing places for outdoor recreation and stress reduction. Let it therefore be resolved that the Asheville Urban Forestry Commission strongly urges the City of Asheville and its citizens to take every step necessary, both in practice and policy, to provide the protection and stewardship of the city's heritage trees to ensure these benefits for future generations. And the heritage tree designation is we propose that any tree, stand, or grove of trees growing on public or private property within the city limits that meet any of the following criteria shall have the heritage designation. A, all large maturing trees 30 inches in diameter or greater, and every small maturing tree 10 inches or greater. B, any tree, stand, or grove of trees designated by City Council resolution as having historical significance, including but not limited to those which were or are planted as commemorative, planted during a particularly significant historical era or by historical figure, marking the spot of a historical event, or located on the property having historic designation. And C, any tree, stand, or grove of trees designated by City Council resolutions as having horticultural significance, including but not limited to unusually beautiful or distinctive specimens in size, structure, or age for their species, determined by comparing the tree to average trees of its species within the city, or providing valuable habitat. Any recognized tree as a state or national champion tree for its species, and all trees designated as treasured trees. And then finally, thank you for your patience. Heritage trees provide valuable ecological services and deserve special protection under Asheville's tree canopy ordinance. The UFC urges the City of Asheville to amend the ordinance to include double credits for preservation of heritage trees and double penalties for removing them. The UFC further advocates that proposed development projects incorporate existing heritage trees and provide proper protection and maintenance as vital components of the city's urban forest. Citizens of Asheville and Buncombe County are encouraged to contact Asheville Greenworks with questions about the proper care of heritage trees and resources available to the community for such care. Thank you for listening to that.
Thank you. And I know most, if not all of us, have seen that in written form as well. So we just need a motion and a second to adopt the resolution. Go ahead, whoever, I missed the hand, so speak up. Go ahead, Patrick. You're on mute though, Ms. All. Sorry, Patrick, you're muted. I think that was a motion. There you go.
Sorry. I have a question, but I'll wait until after there's a motion and a second.
Got it. Do we have a
I
motion?
move that we adopt the resolution.
Thank you. Second?
I second.
There we
Can
go.
I second?
Yeah, you can. All right,
Give
so
that to Zoe.
discussion or questions? Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah. How do you see this as protecting heritage trees on private property?
I see this as an educational tool to help homeowners and others recognize the importance of preserving heritage trees.
Okay.
Any other questions? Then we will vote. And specifically, this recommendation will go to City Council so that it can be discussed and worked in there. Sorry, Haley?
I was just curious if someone could send me a copy of the resolution to link to the action minutes, please. Thank you.
We'll make sure. Thank you. All right, so a vote, starting with Ed.
Aye.
Zoe.
Aye.
Cecil.
Aye.
Patrick.
Aye.
Karen.
Aye.
And I vote aye. So the recommendation passes, and we'll send that up to City Council. And thank you, Karen, for your work on that, and everyone else who provided their input and suggestions.
Yay. Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay. The last thing, oh, we kind of skipped. I'm so sorry. Although we can all see here the staff reports and updates. We already went over most of Mark's updates. We can see the chart for the tree canopy ordinance fee and lieu funds collected and updates there. Any questions on that before we start wrapping up? And then the last item on the agenda was the Greenworks update. Dawn, they had held the tree adoption event. I don't know, Ed, if you have any updates. I know it was a successful event, but.
Yeah, she did send me an update. About 450 trees were available for adoption and 325 people registered for a tree, but only 240 showed up to pick them up. Greenworks is holding some late pickup dates, which is this Saturday and next Tuesday. And whatever trees are left over, they're giving to the city of Black Mountain for planting out there.
Well, it's a win-win as long as they get in the ground. We're good.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right. Well, good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? All right. Once again, I got to thank you, Ed, for being here. And I consider you my personal urban forestry mentor. So thank you so much. But we do have to adjourn. As long as there's no dissenting vote, we can adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
All right. Thank you. All right. Well, we will not meet again until we meet in person for the retreat. We'll see you there. Thank you so much.
Bye.